Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I had always been an avid camper. Every weekend, my friends and I would pack our gear, drive out to the woods, and spend our nights in the wild. It was our escape, our refuge. There was something about being surrounded by nature, just the trees, the dirt, the river, that made everything else seem so far away. We could forget the world for a while and just breathe. But that night was different. That night, something felt off from the very beginning. We'd chosen a spot by a quiet river, deep in the heart of a secluded forest. The kind of place where the trees pressed in on you, their ancient limbs stretching above like a cathedral of leaves. It was peaceful calm, too calm in hindsight, but we didn't know that then. We were just four friends, looking forward to a weekend of fishing, campfires, and laughter. The sun dipped low, and after setting up camp, we sat around the fire. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows against the thick trunks of the trees around us. We roasted marshmallows, told stories, and joked about how we always managed to get lost in the woods, even when we had a map. It was the kind of warmth you get when you're with people who make you feel safe, comfortable. But then, as the night wore on, the air changed. It wasn't anything obvious at first. No howling winds or creepy sounds. Just a growing sense that something wasn't right. I felt it before I saw it. It was around midnight when I first noticed it. A flicker, a movement in the trees just beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe an owl gliding past. But no, it was too quick, too deliberate. I couldn't be sure, but there was something unnatural about the way it moved. It wasn't like any animal I knew. It was more human, but not quite. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. The firelight was flickering, and the shadows were dancing weirdly in the trees. It had to be that, right? But as the night wore on, the flickers turned into something more, something darker. I began to notice it more often. Movement in the trees. Slow, deliberate. At first, it was off to the left, then it shifted to the right. Closer and closer, every time. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. My heart started to race. It wasn't until I saw it, really saw it, that I knew something was wrong. There, just beyond the reach of the firelight, stood a shape. A tall, dark shape. It wasn't an animal, not by any means. The outline was too human, too tall, too still. It stood between two trees, motionless like it was waiting, watching. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The air around me felt heavy, thick. I didn't want to look away. I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was like it was made from the shadows themselves, standing there as if it had always been there, just waiting for me to notice. My friends were too busy talking, too caught up in their own world to notice. I wanted to call out to them, to tell them to look, but my throat was tight, my voice strangled in fear. I knew that if I made a sound, it would disappear. It would vanish, just like the others before it. But at the same time, I didn't want it to disappear. I wanted to know what it was, why it was there. It stood there for what felt like hours. No movement, no sound, just the steady pulse of my heart, hammering in my chest. Time seemed to stretch. It was like I was stuck in some sort of trance. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The darkness swallowed it up, like it had never been there at all. The air around me seemed to return to normal, though my pulse still raced. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand trembling, and ran toward the spot where I'd seen it. I wanted to know if there was any sign, anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No broken branches. No sign of anything at all. Just the forest. Quiet. Empty. I called to my friends, waking them from their sleep, but they were confused. They thought I was just having a bad dream, or that I was messing with them. They said I probably just saw an animal and overreacted. But I knew what I saw. I had seen something, and it wasn't human. We spent the rest of the night on edge, huddled together by the fire, listening to the sounds of the forest. But the more I listened, the more I realized the woods had fallen eerily silent. No rustling of leaves, no chirping of crickets. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. When dawn finally broke, we packed up and left. No one spoke of it as we drove away, but the tension hung thick in the air, like we all knew something had happened. Something we couldn't explain. We just wanted to get out of there. I thought about it for weeks after. The shadow in the trees. The way it had stood there, still and silent, like it had been waiting for me. And every time I stepped into the woods after that, every time I went camping, I felt it. That same sense of being watched, of being hunted. I could feel its eyes on me, no matter where I went. I've been back to that spot a few times since, but each time I feel the same unease, the same pressure on my chest, the same feeling that it's out there, somewhere in the trees, waiting for me to return. And I can't help but wonder, was it ever really gone? Or has it been out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for me to come back? Story 2. Last summer, I decided to go camping alone. I needed some time to clear my head and get away from the constant noise of life. Work had been draining, and I felt like I was suffocating in the routine. So, I drove out to a remote part of the forest, far from the beaten path, where no one would bother me. It was just me, nature, and the silence I craved. Or so I thought. The first night was uneventful. I found a quiet spot by a creek, set up my tent, and built a small fire. It was one of those perfect nights. The air was crisp, the stars clear and bright, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the trees. I cooked myself a simple meal and settled in for a night of peace, hoping the solitude would be enough to quiet the noise in my mind. As I lay there, staring up at the tent's ceiling, I noticed the wind picking up. It wasn't the usual kind of wind, the kind that brushes past you like a friend. No, this was different. This wind had a weight to it. It didn't feel natural. It was almost deliberate. At first, it was nothing more than a soft, almost imperceptible murmur, like someone whispering from far away. I figured it was just the trees swaying, their branches creaking, but then something caught my ear. A voice, barely audible, like a faint murmur in the distance. I shifted, straining to hear, but all I caught was the wind again. I told myself it was nothing, just the creak of the forest settling for the night. Still, the sound stuck with me. There was something off about it. Then it happened again, but this time it was clearer. Not just a whisper, but words. Get out. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up quickly, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't imagining it. It was unmistakable. The voice was coming from outside the tent, carried by the wind, but it wasn't the wind that had spoken. It was something else. Someone else. Get out. It's not safe. Get out. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I unzipped the tent flap. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. No one. Nothing. I stood there for a few moments, trying to steady my breath, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe I was just overtired. I shook my head, forcing myself to laugh it off. Just the wind. Nothing more. I closed the flap and tried to lie back down, hoping that sleep would chase away whatever creeping unease had settled in my chest. But it didn't. The wind wasn't done with me. The whispers started again, this time louder, more insistent. They were coming from every direction, like someone was walking around my tent, softly speaking in hurried tones, too faint for me to understand fully. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I held my breath, listening, trying to make sense of the sounds. They weren't the wind anymore. They were voices, clear and direct, coming from somewhere close, just outside my tent. Leave. You're not welcome here. Leave now. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I clutched the flashlight tighter, my knuckles turning white. It didn't make sense. There was no one out there. I'd been alone the entire time. No campers, no hikers, just me in the wild. But the voices, they weren't stopping. They were growing louder, each one filled with urgency and something else. Fear. Warning. I didn't know. Get out. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent again, my breath shallow and fast. The beam of the flashlight swept across the clearing, bouncing off tree trunks and bushes. Nothing. There was no one there. Just the wind, still blowing harder now, swirling around me like it was alive, pulling the whispers with it. I felt stupid. I had to be imagining it. The wind could play tricks on your mind, make you hear things that weren't really there. But even as I thought that, the whispers continued. They didn't come from any one direction anymore. It was like the wind was speaking through the entire forest, bending the trees and brushing the leaves in a way that made them hum with voices. Leave. Leave this place. It's not safe. The words were clearer now, more frantic, like someone was shouting from the distance, desperate to get my attention. I shivered, tried to calm my racing thoughts, but my body wouldn't listen. My heart thudded in my chest like a drumbeat. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. The forest felt alive, but not in a good way. There was something dark, something hidden beneath the surface, and it didn't want me there. I grabbed my pack, threw it over my shoulder, and bolted from the tent. My flashlight bobbed wildly in the dark as I rushed down the trail, my mind consumed by the voices, their warnings. The wind howled behind me, tugging at my clothes like it was trying to pull me back. I didn't stop running until I reached the clearing near the parking lot. Only then did I dare look over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. But there was nothing. No figure, no shadow, no presence. Just the dark, silent trees. I sat there, tried to catch my breath, my heart still pounding in my chest. I couldn't explain what had happened. I couldn't explain the voices or the way the wind had sounded, like it was alive, like it was trying to speak to me. And then, the worst part, the thing that stuck with me the longest, was the feeling. Even after I left the woods, even after I went back to my car and drove home, the whispers followed me. I'd hear them in the wind, in the rustling of trees outside my window, in the silence of my apartment, when all was still. Get out. It's not safe. Get out. The voices haunted me for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them, faint, almost like an echo, but they were always there, always following me. And now, every time the wind picks up, every time the trees begin to sway, I can't help but listen for them. But I'm too scared to go back. I know whatever was in those woods, it's still out there, waiting for someone else to wander in. And next time, I'm not so sure the wind will warn them. Story 3. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Just a short hiking trip with a few friends in the Appalachian Mountains. We were seasoned campers, all of us, so we thought nothing could go wrong. We were confident, relaxed even, knowing these trails like the back of our hands. The Appalachian has been kind to us in the past, so why would this trip be any different? The first day was everything we had hoped for. The sun shone brightly through the trees, and the trail was as clear as it ever was. We hiked with ease, stopping only to catch our breath and take in the view. We set up camp near a small creek, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we sat around the fire, talking about the usual stuff, work, relationships, the future. The fire crackled, and the warmth spread through our bones. That night, we slept soundly under a blanket of stars, the distant rustle of leaves and the wind the only noise to accompany our dreams. But the next morning, something shifted. We woke up, packed our gear, and started a breakdown camp. As we were preparing to leave, we met him, the old man. He emerged from the woods like a shadow, tall and lean, with skin that looked as though it had been weathered by decades of sun and wind. His beard was long, matted, and streaked with gray, his eyes tired and sunken, as if he hadn't had a restful sleep in years. "Have you seen anyone else out here?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in ages. We hadn't. We hadn't seen anyone else for miles. Just the occasional deer or squirrel, but no other hikers. "No," I said, and the others echoed my response. The old man seemed relieved by our answer. He muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't quite make out, and thanked us before turning back toward the trail, disappearing into the trees as quickly as he had appeared. It was strange, but we didn't think much of it at first. We were seasoned hikers, after all. A little odd, sure, but not worth dwelling on. We finished packing up and made our way down the trail, chatting casually as we walked, trying to push the encounter out of our minds. But that night, around the fire, we couldn't stop talking about him. The old man. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. None of us could remember seeing him on the trail earlier in the day. It was almost as though he had just materialized from nowhere. His weathered appearance suggested he'd been out there for a long time, but we hadn't seen him at all. "Do you think he was lost?" Mike asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "Maybe he's been out here for days." "I don't know," I replied, shaking my head. Something fell off about him. I can't put my finger on it. We all agreed, there was something strange about the encounter. It was late by now, and we were all tired, so we didn't talk about it much more. The fire burned low, and one by one, we retreated to our tents for the night. I tried to sleep, but something didn't sit right with me. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no sounds of animals rustling in the bushes, no distant calls of birds, just the cold, hollow silence of the woods. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, slow, and deliberate. They weren't the kind of sounds you'd expect from an animal. No scurrying, no scratching. These were human footsteps, close by, just outside my tent. I held my breath, hoping I was imagining it. But the sounds continued, moving slowly around our camp. Twigs snapped, branches rustled. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I lay there, frozen, straining to hear more. I heard muffled voices too, barely audible. They were too far away to make out, but they were there, whispering in the wind. I convinced myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear, maybe a deer, but it felt wrong. I kept my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, waiting for whatever it was to pass. And after what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded, leaving only the eerie quiet behind. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, we packed up in a hurry, the odd events of the night still fresh in my mind. As we made our way back toward the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But then, as we neared the parking lot, something caught my eye. There, standing by his truck, was the old man. The same one we had met earlier, his worn face still obscured by the shadow of his long beard. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching us. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I locked eyes with him. There was something wrong about the way he stood there, something off in his gaze. It was as though he wasn't just a man, but something else entirely. None of us spoke. We climbed into our cars and drove away in silence, the feeling of his gaze following us all the way down the mountain road. We never went back to that part of the woods. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the old man was never really a hiker at all, that he wasn't just some lonely soul wandering the woods. I don't know what he was, but I know this. He had been there longer than anyone should have been, and I'm sure he's still there, waiting for someone else to wander too far into those woods, waiting for someone else to hear the footsteps in the night.